Welcome, everybody. We're excited to have you. We are going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is getting product feedback, but more importantly, getting product feedback in Slack. So a quick introduction to myself. I actually worked at Slack for a number of years running their growth team. I'm previously a product leader at companies like Instacart, Zynga, and others, but I'm not the interesting one here. I'm just a moderator today. I'm just here to set the stage and help our two great guests, talk about their real experience getting product feedback for innovative and new products. So we're quick run through the agenda. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about the impact of early feedback on product trajectory. So we're going to get some examples and interesting stories from both Varun and Pici. Michael, I don't know what to call you in a public space. I always call you Pici.
Always Pici.
Always Pici.
Yeah,
From
yeah. We keep
Pici
it
and
casual.
Varun.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got caught up there.
I wish
On
I had a
their
catchy
experiences.
name like that, you know?
I know. We'll call you On. No, I don't know. Anon. I don't know. Whatever.
No, I'm good with Varun, but I do wish
Go
I
with
had
Varun.
that just for the
All right.
future.
I know, me too. I mean, I have a pretty unique first name, so it stands out as you do, Varun. So maybe that helps a little bit. Being Michael, you gotta go by last name, I assume, when you're growing up in school. Uh, we're going to spend 10 minutes on that. We'll spend 10 minutes on user research tactics and best practices. And then we'll spend the last 20 minutes on the meat of what this is really about after we've set the stage on how some really specific tactics on how to leverage Slack to source those insights, especially when you're building an early stage product. All right, next slide. I will introduce Pici, Michael Pici, a co-founder of Day.ai. Michael, Pici, why don't you tell us? I'm going to do this every 5 seconds. Pici, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and also about what Day.ai is, so that we can set the stage for what's coming next year.
Yeah, for sure. So quick background on me. I was the first customer-facing member of the HubSpot CRM team. Worked at HubSpot for over a decade, both as a VP of sales and a VP of product. And after HubSpot, took a little bit of time. Actually, was an EIR at Reforge. I led the growth series and the retention and engagement programs. Had an absolute blast with that. And then about 18 months ago, started Day.ai. We're really reimagining CRM completely for this AI age, all built on top of AI models. The core idea of Day.ai is that in the past, a CRM is essentially a big exercise of organizing a relational database. You have all these different data tables. You have to associate all these things. It kind of becomes a big WYSIWYG engineering problem. And what we're trying to do with the LLMs is take that engineering problem away and organize a company's data the right way automatically with no effort required. So that's the idea. We're in early access now and learning a ton about this exact topic, collecting early feedback, using Slack to do it. So pumped to be in the discussion today. Excited to share what we've been learning.
Awesome. Well, usually to build a founding team, you need to find a sales customer-facing person and a product person and two different people. But Pici is one of the unique folks who have done both, which I think is awesome. Next, let's move to the next slide. And Varun, why don't you give yourself a quick introduction, not of just yourself, but also of what Clay is and what it does, assuming no one's heard of it, just like Pici did.
Sure, no worries. Hey guys, nice to meet all of you. And thank you to Reforge for having us. My name is Varun. As some background, I started my career actually in politics and then have had various roles running different business units at startups. And I'm one of the co-founders of Clay. I lead a lot of the business functions here. So everything kind of sales, marketing, go-to-market related, CS, operations, a lot of the G&A functions. And Clay, just to describe it briefly, we build creative tools to help businesses grow. And we do this by basically helping companies with data enrichment by kind of aggregating a lot of the data providers that exist in the world, putting them into one place and letting you access them and put AI on them and find new data points with LLMs. And then we let you use that data to automate outreach through kind of any channel you want at scale to existing customers, new customers throughout the life cycle. And so that's just about me and Clay, and excited to be here.
Great. Well, I think next slide here. What's interesting about both of these products is that in some ways they are new. Next one, new entrants into pretty established and existing markets. Right? You're selling into CRM is probably one of the most established software markets ever. Marketing, outreach, sales tools, et cetera. Both of you are sort of playing in similar spaces where you have a lot of ingrained behaviors, right? Like the way people already do things is such a big piece of the puzzle. And so something I'd love to start with is how you think about using early stage feedback when you were first building these products or getting new things out the door. Why is this important? And how do you deal with the problem of people, sort of already having a way they want to do things, and maybe even like years of training that's designed around specific tools, specific processes, specific ways of getting things done? Whoever wants to go.
Pete, you usually get started. I'll go from there.
Okay, yeah. So you're definitely right. I mean, CRM is I think it's like the biggest software category that there is. I think, most people are at least at a, cursory level familiar with what the concept is. I think, you know, also probably well known for product folks, right? Like these are systems that tend to be pretty sticky. Somebody, an organization gets their data into them. It's becomes a big effort to migrate people's processes out of them and move them along. And so I think, for us starting in CRM, this concept of really starting from the bottom and starting with new companies who are adopting this technology for the first time is really a pretty natural place to start. You really want to come in with something, not necessarily that you have to do these massive rip outs right away. Like when you're coming in with a system of record play, it really helps to be the first system of record inside of an organization and start with small companies that are adopting for the first time and grow up from there. That's been our strategy thus far. I think what I would say though about um, finding the right types of folks to work with, we definitely went through a period in the beginning where our approach to this whole thing is we believe solving the biggest problem in CRM that exists, which is just the fact, like I mentioned before, that these systems are extremely high maintenance to maintain, to customize, to set up, to evolve as your business grows. Like the database management, your teams hire these huge operations teams to basically just do database management, and the early stage companies really struggle with it.
Right.
And so for us, I think an interesting piece is like the differentiation that we chose of saying, hey, we're going to find ways to automatically do a lot of this for you, is the reason why somebody would say, hey, I'm going to do this instead of a traditional system, right? It's the reason why they're willing to give it a shot. It becomes the compelling event. So I think there's a big connection here between like the way that we chose to position the solution early on with like the types of folks who are going to find us and the types of folks who are going to want to give it a try and start working on it. I think like that's really been a big thing, coming out with a message that is very, very different and addresses what we believe is the core problem with these systems today.
Yeah. I think one thing that Pici said there that resonates with us as well is kind of identifying something that's immediately useful to your customers. I think he called it the compelling event. And for us in the early days, it was data enrichment, and very specifically, it was data enrichment for like lead gen agency owners. And I think for us, we just kept it extremely narrow. Both from an audience perspective and from a use case perspective. And what that enabled us to do was it enabled us, when we would meet for these people for 20, 30 minutes, we were able to solve their full problem in just 20 minutes. And that's rare, I would say, in B2B software initial conversations. And if you can solve someone's problem in 20, 30 minutes, then they're pretty bought in, and they're pretty bought in to give you feedback and to work with you and to stay with you. But you can only do that if your scope is narrow. You can't do that if you're trying to boil the ocean.
Yeah. So to recast part of what I've heard here, which I think is interesting. When trying to identify where to start, when you're trying to change like a big industry or in a big thing, it is probably not in your interest to say, we're going to recreate all of CRM for you, because you probably can't, or everything of your lead gen problems, et cetera, which probably is an impossible task early. So what I'm hearing is, one, find a compelling event, moment in time. What is the time period at which someone is most compelled to use a solution? What is the narrow solution, and what is something you can solve in a short amount of time? I think that's an interesting set of bits, because it's easy to say I have a great positioning or I have a great product, but not the right moment in time. And for Pici, you described early in life cycles where there's low switching costs. For Varun, you talked about sort of identifying a customer base that's pretty narrow, probably not your whole market, right? It doesn't represent what you're actually trying new. So let's talk more about that. Let's talk more about the right early users. So let's say you've recruited 5, 7 pilot users. And I think this applies for new startups as well as for new products, or new features within an existing product, right? You found a couple compelling folks. How do you think about telling the difference between the right ones and the wrong ones? Because sometimes the people with the most acute problems are also the most demanding, especially in enterprise B2B software, with the most specific or sort of narrow needs that may not apply. And how do you think about recruiting and building this early user base in a way that gives you meaningful, helpful, long-term product feedback versus just chasing what the next person is asking for?
Yeah, I think, I've definitely seen there's a couple of there's a couple of specific groups of folks that I'll definitely talk about. But I think the first thing for me has just been finding folks that are really aligned with the vision. I think there's a lot of people who, early on will say, okay, yeah, I believe in your vision. I believe in what you're doing. I want it. I'm down for it. But then pretty quickly, you'll start to see them migrating towards like a pretty traditional set of asks. Hey, actually, I want to do this in a pretty traditional way. Hey, I want to, uh, do this. And I think it's for the people who are willing to think about really willing to work with you on first principles and think about the solution from a different perspective, is the folks that um, have been really great for us. I think it's also people who are really just willing to go all in with the type of
Hmm.
thing that we're doing. It doesn't really help us to have somebody running our stuff on side of something else, right? Like
Right.
people who are like, oh yeah, we have a little something set up, but like we'll run this on the side and see. That's not really useful. We're looking for people who are really willing to dive in and say, yeah, I'm going to bet on this, and I'm going to kick your ass. I'm going to give you hard feedback. I'm going to push you guys, and I'm going to make sure that you do the things that I need to be able to get my job done. That's very helpful. Um, we do not work with folks who are running us on the side or who are using us in a non-system of record capacity. Um, I think what I've seen from early users, though, is there's some users who are willing to get down and dirty and they push every button in the product. They give feedback on literally everything. And we need people like that, right? Like we need people to tell us when we ship something and a button's broken, it doesn't work, and we need to know now. I think there's other people who I kind of consider as these like bar raisers, where they're not really going to engage with something until something hits a certain threshold of like usefulness to them, or the value comes to them instead of them having to go and do it differently and have us solve problems in ways that maybe you weren't expecting that map to a traditional model in your head.
Varun, anything?
Yeah, I think there's kind of that investment or like commitment piece that probably any company like you want to only kind of work with the people who disappeared. Uh, Even in those early in uh, uh, I don't know if you necessarily listen to the people who, with how even if you're disappeared, then I think if you're like a company and agency owners and have like linked to get people, it's just an element there that the structure of it that makes sense for your business.
Yeah. So I think a thing that probably a lot of people, especially in early stage startups, sort of struggle with is, what if I'm not getting a lot of feedback? What if I'm not able to recruit these types of exciting folks? How do I know the difference between I'm versus my vision? You talk about getting people who are vision. He's out that different. Is there an example saying you tried to get people to use it and they just weren't using it and it was the wrong folks, or maybe an example of a time when it was the wrong market? And how do you tell the the wrong product? How do you tell the difference with that? Because I think, for bigger companies, it's easier. You're usually building things based on what people are already asking for. But when you're in this sort of one, that seems like really hard to tell the difference on.
Yeah. Yeah, clear. When we even when we launch new products, it's still difficult, and I think our engineers, our team sometimes don't realize that, right? Because they expect, hey, we'll build this, the people will come, and
Yeah.
that's not always the case. And so there's this like iterative process that still has to happen, and this exploration process that still has to happen. And so I think there's like a couple of pieces. I think one thing is we personally didn't have the issue of not enough feedback. We had too much feedback, I would say, because
Yeah.
we built a lot of like organic loops to make sure everything about our business and everything we did was about feedback, and we could talk about that.
Yeah.
But and in our situation, actually, we were deluged by feedback, and the issue was more how do you prioritize it and think about it.
Right.
And for us, actually, it was simple. It was just like if it's not top of mind, don't worry about it. And don't try to overdo it on the process. Don't try to make sure you have this crazy linear board. Don't try to capture every single piece of feedback. If you're
Yeah.
not thinking about it, it's clearly not important enough. So just don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I like to think in now, next, never. And people always have the last bucket as like, oh, I'll just write everything down. It's like, if you're not doing it now and you're not doing it next, don't even worry about it. Don't worry. Someone will complain later when it is important.
yeah, yeah. But maybe Pichi has some thoughts in like the day journey that might be relevant to the more exploratory phase.
Yeah, I think an interesting example of this is for us, one of the value props that we have is we basically say, hey, look, we're going to record your meetings automatically. We're going to ingest your Gmail automatically. We'll ingest your Slack Connect channels automatically. And then we'll take this unstructured data. We'll build your CRM out of it. Early on, we were working on like the earliest versions of our meeting recording stuff. And we tried to do it with the least amount of like hacky investment possible. And so we were telling folks to basically like record their meetings using like the Zoom cloud. And at Fareed, we had you on this early version,
Yeah.
right? And we were basically like going into your Zoom account, ingesting like a cloud recording you did on Zoom. And that was like just kind of this like playground for us early on to see what we could do. And a lot of people weren't recording. And we were like, what the heck is going on? And we're reaching out to people and they're saying, I'm forgetting to press the record button, this, that, whatever, the other thing. And, there was a big moment of debate of like, we have this recording thing out there. Why don't people record? If people really want to record, do we really think that it would be about pushing the button? Like, is that really what we think the problem is here?
Yeah.
And, we argued a lot about like, or is this really the right stuff? How do we think about it? Whatever. We finally ended up making the investment in doing the proper, AI meeting assistant functionality, send a bot to a meeting, whether you're the host or not. And that feature is like insanely high retention, insanely high usage. The second that we put a version out there that was like polished enough, now it took us a little bit of time to get it together and it was a big investment. Right. But the second we had a version that was polished enough, just the most natural, passive, high usage feature that we had right away. And so I think it is an example of like, and maybe it's in our context of going into a market where there are a lot of viable solutions that exist to solve parts of these problems. Nobody's really put the whole thing together all the way yet. But when you're going up against a market where people have, highly functional solutions to parts of these problems, there is just a table stakes line.
Yeah.
Like there is.
Yeah.
And I think we've learned that on really all of our features where like our style is like we try to put stuff in front of people as early as possible and build from there. But they're on pretty much every area of functionality. There is a table stakes line where it just has to be good enough for somebody to actually use it. And if you convince yourself that they're not using it and you kind of just put a very early version out there and you convince yourself, oh, it's not the thing, I think that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the way I would think about this a little bit is like the more urgent, hair on fire, problematic, huge a problem is, the more friction people are willing to put up with to get a solution. But only if they have no solution today, or if the solution is so hairy. For this, I remember using this. I'm like, this would be really helpful and valuable to me if I adopted it, but the friction was still a little too high, even though the value was there. And I think this is one of the key things about early products is matching the friction with the value. It doesn't mean it's low value just because they won't jump through 70 hoops to get their screen recording properly copied over. It's a different thing. I want to dive in here. We talked a little bit about vision. We talked about the right types of users to recruit. We talked about how to like iterate early, but let's get tactical about real user research tactics here. Can we go to the next slide, please? Two forward, probably. I want to talk about you, Varun. I'll kick it off with you. You talked about designing your product with feedback at the core of how you were building and how you were iterating. Can you just like tell us tactically what that means? Because I don't think I've heard people say that before. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at early product development. So how did you actually ingrain that in the product and in
Uh,
your process?
well, it's less about the product and more about the entire company, I would say,
Okay.
like the entire organization. And so, what I mean by this is maybe a few things. Number one, where do you get the feedback, right? So we had intercom in our app as like a widget where people can chat with, and actually we just shut it down in the early days, and we were like, you know what, if you want feedback from us, if you want our support help, you can only get it in one place, which is our Slack community. And so you have to join the Slack community to get help from us. And it's not like a Slack Connect or anything like that. It's like an
Okay.
actual community. And so you have to like join and you can learn from other people and stuff like that.
It's a
So
giant workspace with
yeah.
all the customers in it who are
Yes,
interested in
yes.
giving feedback.
And we
Okay.
also wouldn't really help that much in DMs. So we would mostly
Okay.
only help in public channels. And
Smart.
so that was really helpful in creating a lot of tight feedback loops and gave us a ton of feedback on what people wanted us to build. The other thing is like even in how we hired. And so tight feedback loops are kind of core to everyone we hire as well, especially in the early days. A lot of our customer facing people are technical, and this enables them to have a much tighter loop between, and obviously, by the way, our engineers at the beginning were the ones directly interfacing with our customers,
Got it.
but like even the support people, our CSMs, our salespeople, they're all very, very technical, and that many have engineering backgrounds, and we don't have specialization in different skill sets where it's like, oh, they're salespeople and they're sales engineers and things like that. We collapse them into one person so that there's a tight feedback loop, and then not only will they understand this better because they have better product sense, but they can more tightly communicate all of this information to engineers because they really get it and they understand it, and they're not in like India or the Philippines or something like that.
Interesting. So talk me through like why you made that decision, because this is actually an interesting instance of like you increase the friction to getting support a little bit, but
Yeah.
you feel like it gave you more value. Like, why did you make that decision? What are the things that come out of pulling support into a public channel with communication across the community versus intercom?
I mean, I was in a lot of Slack communities, and I
Yeah.
kind of noticed that they were all like thought leadership Slack communities. Right. And I was like, well, why don't we I thought it would just it seemed natural actually to just use the space as a place where we could answer support questions. And like the problem we were solving is like I oftentimes found like the questions were coming in different places, and the intercom channel itself wasn't like a great interface for us to like actually interact with them. Now, by the way, as we've scaled, we've kind of unified this so people can
Sure.
still interact with us in Slack, and we have like 20,000 members in that community and ask questions there, but they can ask us in multiple places and it all comes to the same place. But I think there were a lot of benefits. And actually, by the way, friction is a good thing. Friction in the early days is a great thing, actually,
Right.
because it's like, wow, this person actually cares and they care enough to join this
Vision
community.
aligned users who
You
actually
know,
care about it versus
they're
just the
invested,
casual
they're
comments.
committed.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
friction is good. You want to know about more friction? You couldn't even buy the product in app until more than 1 million in ARR. I had to send people manual Stripe links to pay for the product. So
Okay.
there was a lot of friction involved.
Yeah.
This was for a self-serve product, by the way, for like $200 a month or something. So um but there are a lot of benefits, right? There's a lot of benefits where everyone, not only other customers, but the rest of your company can see all the feedback.
Right.
Um, and then our peers are helping each other. The feedback loop is super tight. You can do Slack huddles with them. And then there's moments for delight because people are blown away when their problem, like a technical problem, is solved in an hour or something, which is kind of crazy.
And not only them, which they would see in intercom, but actually everybody else in the community
Yes.
sees that you responded in an hour. I think
Yeah.
that's super interesting. It's
Yeah.
sort of
Not just respond in
building.
an hour, but like
Yeah.
built like a whole thing for them in an hour,
Right.
which is crazy.
I wonder how much too. I'm just riffing here for a second. I often think I'm the one who's the problem when I can't do something in a
Yeah.
product. And so seeing other people
Sure.
struggle or have
Yeah.
issues or have questions about the
Yeah.
same things actually encourages more feedback because it becomes sort of like, oh, it's not me. It's like we're all in this together. And also, I suspect you get a lot more like upvotes, replies, oh, that's a problem for me as well, and sort of can build heat around it. Is that true?
Yeah, that's totally true. And I think like I mean, it's a compounding thing because as people get in there, they see other people doing it. It makes them more comfortable to do it.
Right.
And it keeps compounding over time.
That's super interesting. I want to talk a little bit as well, though, about like, well, actually, Pici, anything to add there about tight feedback loops, early adopters, how you've encouraged feedback from your users and how you pull it from them?
Yeah, I mean, I know we'll compare and contrast, the way we use Slack a little bit later, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. But I would just also add, like, I think just it had building something new. It surprised me how, to use your word, Burn, like how natural it felt to just get on Slack and get feedback from folks. Like I can't actually imagine like what it would be like to try to build a product now if you were only communicating with somebody over email or like could only like do like scheduled meetings. Like I
Mhm.
can't even really fathom what like what building a product would be like in that regard. I think it would be a lot more challenging, it'd be a lot harder. And so yeah, we can talk a little bit more about the compare and contrast, but a lot of this stuff is similar. I mean, we're grinding it out. We're manually onboarding every single user. We're also doing a relatively low price point, personalized onboarding for everyone, making sure they're getting set up, walking them through the whole
Got it.
thing. I mean, and we definitely plan to do that, the same exact way, just truly grinding it out, even though our intent is obviously in our market to, scale and self-serve and whatever. We don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. We're hands-on with every single user, responding pretty much immediately to everybody.
Yeah, it's been super interesting to see this sort of like not reversal, but shift towards a lot more products that are effectively going to be self-serve term, moving towards these sort of personalized handheld onboardings, not because the product is too expensive, too hard, too complicated to set up, but rather because it creates this tight feedback loop with every customer early that gives you the information you need to build a better product from day one and also control who you're bringing in so that they are like tightly aligned and you're sort of like unwrapping the onion one layer at a time or adding layers to it on time to grow your market. I think that's a super interesting thing. Varun, why did you guys choose not to let people buy? Was this for a feedback reason or was this like just it didn't seem important at the time technical thing?
It's no, it was just a we didn't prioritize it reason.
Okay.
It was just a
It was
like,
working well
it can,
enough.
it can keep waiting. It can keep
Yeah,
waiting. And because again, remember, your motive at the time is not to monetize. Your motive at the time, I guess if you have runway, your motive at the time is not to monetize. Your
got it.
motive at the time is to solve people's problems and get a customer adoption and love and things like that. And the money will come if all those other things are there. And so that's not the thing you want to prioritize,
Got it.
especially by the way, the earliest stages, you don't even know what your pricing is going to be. You don't even know what your billing is going to be. So you might as well manually figure it all out. And then when you have more time, as opposed to having to build it and then rebuild it over and over again
Yeah.
when you're not sure.
Yeah, start with value creation versus value capture. It makes a ton of sense. Do you guys use traditional user research methods? It's so interesting. Like, is this augmenting things like, user studies, usability testing, surveys, etc.? Or is this the primary way you get feedback from customers?
It is. We in the early days, I did actually try the the superhuman like product market fit survey that's become kind of like well
Yeah,
known. And so that was I mean, it was a useful exercise actually, to be honest, and it was just a useful thing we did once a quarter, maybe for like a year or so in the very early days. But now since then, we kind of just have recurring, like right now at scale. Now that we have thousands of customers, we just have a channel where like people get automatically an NPS survey at a certain point, and we just
got
see
it.
all the responses as they come in.
Got it. Great question. I was going to save questions for Q&A, but this one's really applicable right now from Chris Palucki. Hopefully I said your name right. He says, I can see how a Slack community can be super helpful to gather feedback, but how do you build one if you have 0 clients? Do you recommend then using a public Slack community instead, like leaning on someone's third-party Slack? Or yeah, like how do you get to the critical mass? Because there's nothing worse than an empty Slack no one's talking in, because then it's kind of dead forever, right?
Yeah. Well, again, remember it's not a community. It's a
Okay.
it's a support channel.
Ah,
Um,
interesting.
it's just it's become a community because there were enough people were doing thousands of people were doing
Got it.
support there that they decided to hang out as well. But our intent was just to help people with support.
Got it.
I actually think it's really hard to build a Slack community, which is why I didn't try. But I think that you could. Which is why I did this other way, which is help people with support, and then if it works, then it'll become a community naturally.
Got it. So you actually don't have, instead of it being a like network, single-sided network, you're like, hey, this is just like a high bandwidth email like channel for
Yeah,
communication with our team. You're
yeah,
guaranteed someone's going to respond, and so it's
yeah.
worth doing. Okay,
Yeah. And
that makes
now
a
it
lot.
looks more like a community, though there is still thousands of questions that come in per week.
Sure.
But that's only as a result of the scale that's happened.
Interesting. All right. Other feedback methods, Pici, is this the primary way that you communicate with customers, or do you have other? I know your style is slightly different. We'll get into that in a second. But is Slack and direct communication with actual customers the main way you do this, or do you communicate with prospects, non-customers? This seems really good for figuring out the problems your existing users have. But what other methods might you use to identify like future problems, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing, I think, Varun, you call it the reverse demo. I mean, that's what we're doing. Like before I meet with somebody to set them up on the product, I send them a link. They get started. They spin the product up on their own. We sync all their data. We bring it in. When we jump on an onboarding call, I'm saying, "Great, hey, welcome. Tell me, why did you sign up for this? What made you excited?" And I'm just confirming, like I'm like basically filling my marketing loop up, right? I'm like, okay, do you talk about the vision the same way I think about the vision? What really resonated in the marketing? Like, what did you hear about us that made you so excited to do this over other options? Okay, great. I get a quick sense of like, what's your current situation? Why is this important? What's the urgency level? Great. And then I'm like, hey, just show me your screen. Let's go. And let's get you set up right now. And basically, the whole team is just always measuring that delta between, hey, you know, where can we get somebody and where do we need to get them? And like that delta is the only thing that we're focused on shrinking. Um, and of course, now somebody, I had a situation this morning where somebody threw something in a Slack channel and is like, hey, on this page, I have to hit the browser button back 3 times to get back to the place where I'm going to, whatever. Now, I'm not going to say to them, "Oh yeah, I'm going to fix the browser button." I'm going to say, "Tell me what you're trying to accomplish.
Right.
Like, what goal do you have?" And so maybe that pulls in a little bit of like more kind of like traditional user testing methods of like, "Hey, okay, cool, I get the back button. What job are we doing?" And
Okay.
I'm always trying to like, in Slack when I'm talking to folks and I'm handling support issues, I'm always trying to level that back up to like, what are you really trying to accomplish here? What are you really trying to do with this job?
Got
Um,
it.
but those are our two
Okay.
major grinds.
So let's go to the next slide. Varun, I would love you to talk about, I thought this was one of the most interesting things in our pre-prep that we talked about because it was something I'd personally never heard before, which is go deep, like what is a reverse demo? So we're talking about different types of early stage research. We talked about type feedback loops. We talked about directly observing, meeting them where they are, using Slack, making it simple, etc. But what is a reverse demo? Like, how do you think about that? Why is it important and what value do you get from it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'll just caveat by saying that it's not that I would recommend this for every single type of product, and I
Sure.
wouldn't necessarily recommend this for products with big sales teams and companies at much greater scale. But in the earliest days, especially when you're trying to build a self-serve product, it creates a lot of a very tight feedback loop. And so tactically, what it is just saying, I mean, very similar to what Pici just described, which is, hey, like instead of a normal software sales demo where you show up and I like share my screen and walk you through the product. It's very different. And one of the reasons I did this was because like this is actually how I learned. I learn best by doing it, not by watching someone else do it.
Right.
And I was just like noticing at the beginning I would do normal demos and these people wouldn't get it. And so I was like, well, I learned better this way. So let's see if other people learn better this way too. And it seems that they do. And so basically it would be like Fareed, if you were one of like these early customers, you would sign up and I would send you an email beforehand. It was like, hey, come to this demo with a data set and sign up for an account.
Got it.
You show up and we will basically solve your data problem in 30 minutes. And you will tell me your problem and I will kind of like off the top of our heads basically figure out a way to solve your full problem in like 20-30 minutes.
Got it.
And my goal really was actually just to try to blow people's minds in 20 to 30 minutes.
Love it.
And by the end they would have a solved problem, an enriched data set, because remember that was a scope, it was narrow. And they would be bought in and committed. And then I'd be like, join the Slack. And I would literally make them join the Slack in the call.
While you were
You
sitting
know?
there, that's
Yeah. I was
great.
like, go. It's clay.com/Slack. Join it right now. And then
Yep.
send me a DM once you're in there. And I would and then yeah. And so that's how we would like do this in the early days. And what was great about this is I would get a masterclass in UX. I would just watch them. So they would share their screen. They would go through they would do things. I would use Zoom annotations to point at different places and tell them to click which buttons. And I would notice the things they didn't click. I would notice that where they had issues. I would notice when I was telling them to do something they wouldn't understand it. And I would take copious notes and work with our team, like our engineers, Eric and other people, and be like, this is all the learnings we had. And we would make all these
Yeah.
adjustments. And we would do that over and over and over again.
I think this is a really interesting thing, and I'm seeing it across a lot of different
Yeah.
companies, including things that I'm working on right now, which is this shift in the sales process from my job is to sell you on this product and show you all the bells and whistles and
Yeah.
I'm in control and you're just writing a check to I am helping you solve a problem in the moment and I'm collecting as much user feedback as
Yeah.
humanly possible that can get fed back into the product team. And I think this is like becoming more and more common. And I think it's really interesting is treating sales and success as support and product input.
Yeah.
I think it's really smart.
And by the way, we were able to turn this from a product where no one could use it to like in a self-serve way, and you'd have to do like 8 demos to get someone to pay you a few $100 a month, to in a matter of like 7 or 8 months, like 1 or 0 demos to buy the product,
Okay.
just like by doing this over and over and over again.
All right. Well, we have some great questions. I want to take one more in line here, and then we'll save the rest for after, which is okay. You've done an incredible job, both of you, of getting these rivers of feedback. We call them feedback rivers, just like spews and spews of stuff. And instead of doing it in Zendesk, Intercom, or other systems of record, you maybe are using Slack, phone calls, communication, etc. Sorry, not phone calls, Zoom calls, etc. How do you deal with the prioritization problem when you have, and this covers a couple of the questions in the Q&A, maybe a lot of redundancy, maybe not a clear sense of what's been asked when. How do you track this stuff and manage it so that you actually have a well prioritized list of things to work on? You talked a little bit about this, Varun, of not documenting everything, but how do you decide what the cream is? Like, what's the stuff at the top? Pici, I'm curious your perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, so for us, interestingly, being in the CRM space and saying, hey, look, we're actually realizing that we're talking to basically all of our users now on Slack. Okay, all of these users are putting these types of questions in. What happens when you just ask the LLM to produce you a list of all of the support questions that you've gotten? Okay, now what happens when you segment that by, okay, now give me the list of bugs that were reported.
Yeah.
Okay, give me the list of feature requests that people have. And so, really, we've kind of started to turn our product development in that direction of having this concept of basically actions, right? You could think of it as like kind of a traditional version of it would be something like a task. We have this concept of an action, and across all of your things, somebody tells you to follow up later. Great, that's an action. It's typed as a follow up. Somebody tells me they're having this problem. Great, that's an action. That's a support. And so we're now in the place of building our product essentially to cater to the thing that you just talked about of teams really keeping these feedback loops extremely tight and companies deciding to build their go to market and their product teams in a way that is everything is spiritually centered around the voice of customer. How do you actually take that and help people action it in real time and make good decisions? That's essentially what we are productizing.
Okay. So you're solving this by dog fooding, is like, hey, our product is a solution to that problem, so let's use it. Varun, you probably have a slightly different approach to this. I'm curious how you deal with it at scale.
Yeah, I mean, to be totally honest, we don't have a good solution for this feedback problem.
I love this kind of answer.
This is a problem, and like there are products like Interpret and others, and like Unwrap and stuff like that, and Product Board that kind of help with this. But we still are taking the mindset of what's top of mind is important and what isn't. I was just like looking through all these questions, and I wanted to just like answer a couple really quickly because there's so many. Like I can just run through them. Someone asked about tech stack. Jose Luis asked about the tech stack for Slack. Just really quickly, we used to use Pylon. We use Intercom. Pylon was great, but we just scaled our volume, and so we use Intercom, and then we use Channeled as the bridge between Slack and Intercom. And so that seems to work well for us and keeps it like unified. The prioritize and manage feedback at scale, we don't basically. There's that. The FTE per Slack messages. Again, we have we don't outsource our support to the Philippines or India or something like that. We hire New York-based people with New York salaries in office, and they all very often have very technical backgrounds, and it's a lot. So I can tell you that like companies at scale, I'm not going to say the names, but like multi-billion-dollar companies with thousands of employees are each agent is probably doing 50 or 60 kind of support tickets a week. Ours are doing double that, which is not sustainable, I would say. And so we're obviously staffing up that team more aggressively. We're investing in content and docs and AI solutions to help improve that. But yeah, that's kind of the pace we're at right now, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Got it.
And also, last thing on the advisory board, I don't know, maybe this is just me, but I find this to be kind of just like a somewhat nonsense thing, to be honest. I get it on the advisory board things, but I just it's a lot more work than I think people fully realize.
Yes, there are a ton of work.
And it's a lot of work to do well. And if you're going to ask people to make a commitment and you don't do it really well, which is hard to do, by the way, then it ends up being worse than you doing the first time. And to be honest, I don't really know if you need it, because if you actually are working on something meaningful, you probably have some customers who are already talking to you. And it's not totally clear to me what you're going to get if you make a formal advisory board and like meet with them on this regular cadence, when you could just be in Slack meeting with them 8 times a day And that's way more effective, though it might not be something that's written about in some article that would suggest you to do it.
Got
You
it.
know, so
I think the one exception there, and I don't have direct experience with this, but sort of observed it at Slack, is once you're in a world where you have a small subset of your customers who are way up market with
yes,
crazy needs that are
like
pulling,
really, really big
like
companies.
really, really big, it
Yeah,
can be helpful because their feedback has to be sort of it's like, who are the people paying me over $1 million a
yeah, yeah,
year?
yeah,
They
yeah.
have like uniquely valuable feedback that's important. I want to use this as an opportunity to jump to the next thing. Pici, you do Slack very differently than Varun has just described, which is an open Slack community. Can we go forward 2 slides, please? You use Slack Connect, and I would love to hear about why you chose this, because and how you think it gives you the right value. This is a really interesting thing. When we were building Slack Connect, I wasn't on the team that built it, but I was there and helping out and doing a lot of stuff. Customer feedback for B2B companies was a surprise use case. It just sort of caught us by surprise. We didn't think that was going to be common. We thought it would be agencies, partnerships, et cetera. And it turned out that our biggest connectors were companies connecting with all of their customers. They were huge nodes in the graph. They were like doing Slack connects with hundreds of folks. I know that you've taken on this approach instead of having a single community. Maybe you have that as well, but you use Slack Connect. So why don't you describe what that means, how you do it, and why you think it helps your company with the types of feedback that are most important to you?
Yeah, one more note before that on the customer advisory board thing is one other time where I think that might be really valuable is when you're making very like programmatic decisions in the company that aren't necessarily like based on like how do we improve the product, but start being questions about how a group gets impacted by like a large strategic
Yeah.
decision. You know what I mean? Like if I
Yeah,
take the
like we're
example of
gonna
HubSpot,
sunset this feature, and
take the
we
example of
want to make
HubSpot
sure
of
you
like how,
understand. Yeah.
yeah, take the example of HubSpot, how like they sell through partners and they also sell direct. And like, we're going to make this change of how something works in the direct. Well, what do partners think about that? Right. It like when you start to have conflicting groups who care about different things, I think, yeah, but
Okay.
agree with the general vibe
Got it.
of what we talked about. I think on the, so for us, I started by trying to do what Varun does. I started by trying to have one group in Slack where I would invite everyone to, and I would ask, people to put their feedback in there. And it was crickets. Didn't really get much at all. And I think what's different about our use case is that from the outside looking in, if you look at something like Clay's like really fun to talk about because it's like people making stuff, right? It's like, oh, look at this really interesting thing that I built. And I can show somebody else that idea and they can say, oh, I see what you did there. Okay, now I can replicate that. I think it's kind of back to that sort of spirit of this being like creative tools and like tools that people really use and do things with that maybe they didn't even anticipate they could do. With our stuff, the vision is much more like we're going to do it for you. Like when it works, there's nothing for the user to do. It just they just get benefit from it. And so users aren't necessarily talking about how they're using something. And then
Right.
additionally, when our folks, if you think about the Clay use case, when somebody has a problem with their Clay instance, probably for the vast majority of the use cases, they can take a screenshot of that and they can put it in a Slack because it's not like sensitive customer information or sensitive
Right,
data.
right,
I'm working with the data that's
right,
in your Gmail account.
right.
Right.
And so if you want to take a picture of that and send it in,
Yeah.
you don't want to share that with a bunch of people. And so I think there's these different modalities around
Okay.
data privacy. I think there's these different modalities around done for you versus like the whole purpose is to explore it and do creative stuff. I think those change the dynamic of how people want to engage. As soon as we went to Slack Connect channels and one-to-one channels, we got just constant streams of people reporting stuff, talking to us.
Let me just do a quick overview of what Slack Connect is in case people don't know. Instead of having a separate Slack workspace that's designed for, customers of Clay, what it allows you to do is connect a channel in your own company workspace to someone else's company workspace. So it looks like a channel in their own Slack that actually has people from Day in it. And I think one of the other benefits is each side can control the membership. So if Pici runs into a infrastructure issue, he can pull an engineer into that channel with that customer directly, or vice versa on the other side if someone else has that. So it's in their own Slack, almost like it's part of their company. So that's the main difference. The downside being you don't see all the other customers. It's not private, but it's effectively a private communication channel between you and your customer. Can you go to the next slide? So Pici, like, privacy becomes a big thing for this. It still has the same same speed benefits, right? Of like, as soon as somebody posts something, you get something. So it's not like email or a support channel, etc. What are some other, what else have you unexpected benefits have you gotten by having these channels with each customer?
I mean, I think the biggest unexpected one for us, like we kind of have, I know Reforge like teaches a lot about like the aha moment, right? Where it's
Mhm.
like, you know, that first time where somebody just has this like emotional reaction to your product and it's just like, wow, okay, I love this. I think for us, the Slack has been a big source of testimonials. It's been a big source of understanding when you have somebody hooked, right? I set you up, I get you on your way. I check in with you a day later and I say, hey, what are your reactions so far? And you get it at that point. You know if you have a customer, you know if someone's not interested. Like it's just all there. I think for us on the Slack Connect, like yeah, there's no vibes about like oh, do I want to say this in front of other people?
Right.
Do I want to blow them up in front of this group? Do I want to, we don't deal with really any of that. We just deal with really easy and fast access. I think the other thing is that I didn't realize, but when you do the Slack Connect, they put it in their main Slack.
Yes.
And so another piece is like I think sometimes when you join like these multiple Slack workspaces, if you don't make a habit of going into that other
Yeah.
workspace, you just don't go.
Yep.
Versus when I send you a message, it pops up right where you are.
Yeah, it's a DM in your own workspace or an app message in your own workspace, which is a huge benefit. I think this is an interesting thing. We got a question in the Q&A, and I'll just answer this because I have thoughts on it, which is Slack a good, communication tool if you are a B2B or let's say a B2C or a mobile company? And I think the answer is no, because the big thing that makes Slack work for people, if you're selling to business customers, is they probably already use Slack. It is unlikely that I've been through this of trying to convince someone who does not have a Slack account at all because they don't use it at work or have never used it to use a brand new channel with a new UI, with a new app, with a new website they have to go to use it is very difficult versus I already use Slack and now it's just I hit command 2 and I'm in the Clay workspace, or I see a red dot pop up on my phone when Pici wants to respond to me about the problem that I'm having. So it's really about being close to where they already are. We found this with Reforge is that there are a lot of downsides to Slack for a 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 person community, but the upside of they already have it installed on their machine is really, really good. You see this with AI companies. A lot of them use Discord. And a big reason is that that's sort of the default or one of the default communication spaces for things like this. And a lot of them, AI companies have emergent behaviors and emergent like properties. And so like the reason Midjourney uses Discord, for instance, is they want that sharing. Oh, here's how you make a really cool anime picture, etc. So I think there are some important benefits there. We're down to 2 minutes. Varun has a hard out. Let me just check the Q&A real quick here to see if there's anything else. We talked about managing customer expectations. We talked about mobile apps. We'll do this last one for you, Pici. You mentioned prioritizing feedback from fully engaged users, but this can lead to focusing too narrowly on a specific set, not enough to grow the product. How do you manage this question of making sure you're not over-focused on the specific needs of your early adopter customers as you're trying to grow a product? And then when you're done, we'll call it a wrap. And this has been a great event, and I appreciate both of you taking your time because I know everybody's got somewhere to be right at the hour.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would say to that is, uh, I think Varun said it really well at the beginning of the discussion. Like, we're building a large product footprint area. We have to stay narrow. We have to pick a pretty
Right.
narrow segment and get after it, or else we're going to have a really hard time. Um, and so I think uh, qualifying the users who are coming in the door. I spend the majority of my time talking
Yes.
to folks who I tell, hey, you're not the right fit for this, and have a good day. And I hear their perspectives, and I learn their perspectives, and I understand what's going on. But the folks that we're letting in are a group that is shares a set of attributes that we believe is a big enough market for our company to be successful, and gives us enough focus to be able to execute well, I
Yeah.
think is the way I would say it.
Yeah, there's a great article that the folks at Linear wrote about this idea of using your wait list as a way to open up your qualification criteria slowly over time, not as a way to generate hype and get excitement, but rather, I'm only going to let in qualified customers that hit this narrow. And then in phase two, I'm going to slightly widen what qualified means. And then I'm going to slightly widen. And so I think about it as thinking about these concentric circles or sort of layers of an onion, and making sure that you're unwrapping them one at a time. If you jump, I've seen a lot of companies get really crushed by getting excited about the shiny enterprise $1 million customer that tanks their roadmap and is impossible to make happy too early, even though everyone's headed there eventually in B2B. I think that's a great place to wrap. Folks, Pici, Varun, it was a pleasure. Thank you for your candidness, and most importantly, specific and tactical advice for how to run these types of communities. This has been super fun and super valuable, I hope, for all of our
Thank you, guys.
listeners today.
Thank you, Fareed,
Thank
for
you, guys.
hosting. Thank you to Reforge. Thank you, guys.
Cheers. All right.
See ya.